Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing the powerful Open Great League team that helped me go on a 20-game win streak up to 2980 ELO right to the doorstep of Legend while battling on my wife's account. Now, this team was created by multi-time regional champion Colin 6. This team got him to Legend, and after playing it, I can definitely see why. The team features Shadow Malamar lead with Jellicent and Tinkaton in the back. Now, I played this team in the Open Great League on the new system, not in Competitors Cup. I did end up starting behind by a turn in several games, which made things quite difficult, but overall, the fact that a lot of opponents' teams had Mimikyu was really good because this team is very strong into Mimikyu. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we pick up a slightly negative lead in the first match, Shadow Malamar into Shadow Dusknoir. Now normally Shadow Malamar is able to win the 2s into Shadow Dusknoir, but unfortunately, this Malamar is pretty bad IVs. It only has 8 defense, which means Shadow Dusknoir can usually get an Astonish breakpoint into it. That means that normally Malamar should win 2s here, but this Malamar unfortunately will end up losing 2s. However, getting the Dusknoir low and then going for energy on Tinkaton could work pretty nicely for me, but my opponent actually surrenders switch advantage, and they're going to look for big farm on their Tinkaton. The good news is I have an extremely hard answer to Tinkaton in the back with Jellicent, so I can stay in with the Malamar, get huge damage with Superpower, and now they have a 5 Fairy Wind head start, but their energy is really not going to do a lot against Jellicent. I'm more than happy to absorb a Gigaton Hammer here. Gigaton is going to land, I'm just going to look to farm up. They try for a Surf Catch onto Kingdra, and now I can farm up till just shy of 100 energy. Shadow Ball is going to hit for nice damage onto the Kingdra. They end up no shielding, and then I can send in the Tinkaton. Tinkaton is going to have to take a Surf, but this is not the Shadow Kingdra. Surf is not going to do a ton of damage. I'm going to get a huge farm down, and then exit with a Gigaton Hammer already loaded. My opponent brings back in their Tinkaton to mine, but this game is already over. I full send Gigaton Hammer, they end up calling the bait, and we're able to get the win. We move to game number 2, leading Shadow Malamar into my opponent's Malamar. They are not on the Shadow though. If one Malamar is Shadow in the matchup, then 2 foul play should still be enough to secure the knockout. One advantage of having a pretty bad Malamar is the fact that you will oftentimes win charge attack priority in the mirror, and that really allows you to dictate the game. Most Malamar leads are going to have Tinkaton in the back, so having switch advantage out of that matchup is pretty helpful because then you can align your Jellicent onto the Malamar. I do win charge attack priority here, my opponent is going to let that go, and switch advantage has been secured. My opponent brings in a different steel type, they go for Corviknight. I'm not quite convinced that an Air Cutter would have knocked out there after 9 sand attacks, so I'm able to make a foul play. My opponent actually CMP ties on the 10th. This, with the extra sand attack, might actually tick the knockout, and it does. That's about exact HP for an Air Cutter, and now with a shield advantage, I can send in the Jellicent. My opponent is very firmly outside of Shadow Ball range, so double Surf is going to be the way to go. So I can fire off the Surf, my opponent is going to no shield, I reach for Surf number 2, but they're going to outpace. This is highly likely to be an Air Cutter bait, but I can't afford no shielding a payback. That would be absolutely catastrophic. If my opponent ends up shielding, then I have pretty high incentive to just try and preserve the Jellicent. I'm going to farm up, pivot into Tinkaton, and my opponent is going to fire off energy. I wall everything Corviknight could throw here. They ended up going for an Air Cutter bait, and they're going to reveal their final Pokemon in the back is Diggersby. Now on paper, ground type into a steel type, this should be a good matchup for the Diggersby, but Gigaton Hammer on Tinkaton is just so laughably strong. I'm able to do huge damage with Gigaton that will very easily pick up the 2 at KO, and if my opponent throws the Fire Punch here, well then I'm just able to get a massive overfarm with the Jellicent. So they overfarm, not wanting to give me a ton of extra Jellicent energy, but my switch timer's up. So I can pivot back into the Jellicent, put up the shield, and my opponent doesn't have the energy needed to go for an Air Cutter bait into a payback. So even if they bait me, it's still a very safe shield because I know they can never make the payback after. I fire off the Shadow Ball, knocking out the Corviknight, and we're able to take the win. We move to the next match, Shadow Malamar, this time going to be greeted on the lead with a Mantine. This is a pretty nice matchup as Shadow Malamar always wins zeros. Even if they full send a Water Pulse, that's very okay. A Water Pulse should still not prevent you from making double foul play and securing the zeros. But I end up calling a Twister bait, and now that I've called the Twister bait, I feel like I'm actually in a very, very favorable position. I believe my opponent ended up starting behind a turn in this game, which is really not ideal. You're going to see a bit later on, I end up starting behind turns in several matches as well. That's something that I imagine they're trying to work to fix, but it's still very frustrating to play on in the meantime. If you end up no-shielding a Twister, then you can actually shield and play out matchups. The way they're able to win the further shielding scenarios is by landing a Water Pulse. They send in Carbink, I bank a Superpower, pivot into Jellicent, and they send in a Marowak. And this team is just getting absolutely shredded by backline Jellicent. Jellicent able to land the Surf for huge damage, and I'm able to CMP tie Surf to the Bone Club. Bone Club never gonna knock out. If my opponent shields, they lose. And if they no shield, they're also going to end up losing. They will end up no shielding. They can bring in the Carbink, switch timers up, we send in the Tinkaton, and my opponent is going to immediately resign the match. We move to the next game, Shadow Malamar into Jumpluff. Now this is a pretty big core breaker for the team. Jumpluff does very well into Malamar, and it does very, very well into Jellicent, so I'm forced to stay in. The Shadow Malamar can hold its own pretty decently here, but this matchup always feels very bait dependent. If you're ever able to call an Energy Ball or shield an Acrobatics, you're in a pretty good spot, but unfortunately, I end up shielding the Energy Ball. I immediately undertap here, predicting they would fire off the Energy Ball back to back, but they don't. That gives them an entire Fairy Wind sneak, and now I'm never going to be able to win switch advantage here. However, they should set up a pretty massive farm down for Tinkaton or force them to pivot out. So I send in Tinkaton, my opponent is going to pivot out, and they send in Shadow Ninetales. Shadow Ninetales is a weak spot for this team, I'll be honest. Even though we have Jellicent, Jellicent is not a particularly strong answer to the Ninetales. Surf would do a ton of damage, but you're going to see Shadow Energy Ball does huge damage onto the Jellicent. I will shield up the first, arguably a misplay in case they end up getting a defense drop, but they don't, so the play doesn't end up backfiring. I need these Ninetales off the field as soon as possible, so as soon as I tank the Energy Ball, I instantly undertap the Surf, just to guarantee the knockout before the switch timer comes up. So Ninetales will be KO'd in the back. What is this doing here? There is a Bastiodon. This is a relic of a pastime. And the good news is Tinkaton does very well here. I fire off the Bulldoze and the luck is in my favor. I get the 50-50 debuff. Suddenly, they're at -1 defense. Bulldoze is double super effective. Gigaton is an insanely efficient neutral attack. So, all in all, I feel like I'm in a pretty good spot here. My opponent will still have the ability to pivot into the Jumpluff. Bulldoze lands, in comes the Jumpluff, and I'm able to have enough residual energy to make Gigaton. This is going to snipe down the Jumpluff. My opponent can bring back in the Bastiodon, but they are in so much trouble. I'm not going for Bulldoze anymore. I'm full sending Gigaton. I believe this does do slightly more damage. I fire off Gigaton, huge damage onto Bastiodon. We snipe down with the Hex from Jellicent, and even despite a pretty catastrophically bad lead, we're able to get the win. Incredibly cool lead for my opponent in the next match as I lead Shadow Malamar into Shadow Swanna. Shadow Swanna is a very scary Pokemon. It offers insane fast move pressure with Gust. I'm expecting my opponent's going to throw 1 Gust and the move, so I throw 3 Psywaves and get a catch and sneak of the Aqua Jet onto the Jellicent. I imagine I could be answered here with a normal type, especially when they farm up a ton of energy, but to my surprise, no Licky Licky comes out. Instead, it's going to be a Stunfisk. Stunfisk, not a particularly strong answer to a Jellicent up energy. I'm just going to throw the Surf on alignment. I want to guarantee big damage or that Final Protect Shield. My opponent holds onto the Stunfisk, giving up that Final Protect Shield, and I'm more than happy just to let the Jellicent go. My opponent could have overfarmed way more here, so I'm very happy that they chose not to get a big energy head start, and now I can bring in the Malamar. Even though I could have thrown a foul play there, I want to shield and try and overfarm because I'm going to need energy to deal with the Swanna. Speak of the devil, there it is. Swanna is going to hit the field. Swanna did rebank an Aqua Jet. Now the question is, can I get the Psywave down? I don't think I can, so I'm forced to fire off the foul play. But I will get the HP back because I threw 3 Psywaves. So now I'm at 3 extra Psywaves of energy, and I'm still at the health that I was before. In the back, they have Primeape, and unfortunately, trainer, this is a Shadow Superpower. They are not going to be surviving. Superpower picks up the 1-hit KO. Back in comes the Stunfisk. We send in the Tinkaton. Tinkaton is just way too healthy, and my opponent is going to resign the match. We move to the next game, Shadow Malamar into Mimikyu. Now this is a pretty good lead matchup for the Shadow Malamar. Now there can be some argument to be made here of whether the Mimikyu ends up shielding the first, because if the disguise is broken, then my Psywaves do a little bit of extra damage. Unfortunately, I believe this is one of the games where I do end up starting behind a turn, which is really rough. I will put up the shield as they fire off the Shadow Sneak, and now that I've gotten the disguise broken, I can actually start to charge up my charge attacks. The reason that I no bubble the first is I know they're either going to be shielding or it's going to break the disguise, so either way, it's going to be doing no damage. Well, to be more specific, it's going to be doing exactly 1 hit point of damage to the shield. But now I can go for a full Psywave down and win switch advantage. In comes Tinkaton, but I can fire off Superpower and remove half their health instantly. Superpower is going to be no shielded. They pivot out, snipe me down with Annihilate, and wow, my Jellicent is very safe into their backline. However, I'm going to be bringing in the Tinkaton. Unless my opponent's running close combat, which is pretty rare on Counter Annihilate, then I'm always going to be able to survive what they throw here. It is just going to be the Rage Fist, and now I can just start spamming out Bulldozes. 50-50 chance at a debuff. The Bulldoze debuff does come through, and now I can fire off Bulldoze number 2. They're at -1 defense, so this will be putting them very low. Bulldoze gets a second debuff, they pivot their Tinkaton into mine, but I can pivot out and now send in the Jellicent. Gigaton Hammer is going to hurt, but I think the correct play here is to instantly undertap the Shadow Ball. I don't want to take any extra damage. I want to keep as much health as possible to try and survive a Rage Fist. I know my opponent does have the Rage Fist banked, and they're going to be throwing one in the move. My Hex will knock out. If the Rage Fist doesn't take the knockout, we barely hang on. Hex KOs, and the decision to instantly throw instead of overfarming wins me the game. We see a familiar lead in the next match, Shadow Malamar into Mantine. Same game plan as before, I'm always just going to be no-shielding the first and playing the zeros. If my opponent does end up baiting with a Twister, then I can potentially look to try and play it out. But they go for the Water Pulse, and you're going to see right away, I'm always going to be able to make 2 foul plays, even if they're able to land the nuke, and this just feels like such a comfortable way to play out the matchup. This time, I do start with all my fast moves intact, so I'm able to throw on what should be the correct timing, take the knockout, and win the lead. My opponent now going to send in Furret. I have a very strong answer to Furret in the back. It's time to send in Tinkaton. My opponent stays in to throw energy. I'm very okay letting this go. Brick Breaker, Trailblaze, neither one is going to be particularly threatening. They go for the Trailblaze, they pivot out into Annihilate, and it's actually a low kick Annihilate. The last Annihilate we saw was on counter, but the low kick Annihilate, this is where things could get a little bit scary. I'm going to go for the Surf, anticipating that my opponent has to put up the Protect Shield here, but if memory serves, they end up making a sick bait call, no shielding, and they're able to make the move. I decide to let this go. Bit of an error by me to not go for the Shadow Ball. I assumed they would invest in the Annihilate, but either way, we should be in a really good spot with the Tinkaton. I think if my opponent didn't throw the Trailblaze and pivoted and it held the energy, this would have been a lot closer of a game. But they Trailblazed, they boosted up, and then they pivoted out, and then they just didn't have any energy to try and boost through the Tinkaton in the endgame. We move to the next match, Shadow Malamar into another Mimikyu, and same game plan as before. I'm always just going to stay in this matchup and try and play it out. Always going to be zero bubbling the first because I know it's never going to be doing any more damage than 1. My opponent will let the disguise break, and now these Psy Waves can really start to ramp up. Instant Shadow Sneak comes out from my opponent. I'm always going to be putting up the shield because I've noticed a lot of Mimikyu lead teams in the Open Great League will very frequently have the Tinkaton in the back. So having that switch advantage and being able to put Jellicent on it will usually put me in a very good spot. My opponent ends up fully sacrificing it, and they're going to be sending in a Azumarill. I'm going to bank his superpower for later and send in Jellicent. Jellicent going to be answered with a Primeape, and I'm just going to keep farming and wait for my opponent to throw. My opponent will fire off the Rage Fist. That's very okay by me. And now I can make it to the back-to-back Surfs before they're able to make Rage Fist number 2. I will have to throw the next Surf on alignment, but I can guarantee solid damage or that final Protect Shield. And considering a superpower is banked, they know they're going to have to let that go. So they can now overfarm massively to exit with a move. And in a bit of a controversial play, I think I'm actually going to end up shielding the Shadow Malamar. And that's because I don't want to take boosted Karate Chops on the Tinkaton and potentially put it closer to a range where a Hydro Pump plus Bubbles could take the knockout. So I shield up the Rage Fist and instantly pivot into Tinkaton as they send in a Azumarill. The Simul Swap, Fairy versus Fairy, and I'm not baiting. I feel like my opponent's only win con in this game is trying to call a bait, so I full send Gigaton and they will actually put up the shield. Even if they do have Hydro Pump, which almost every Azumarill does nowadays, it's just going to fall short of taking the knockout. The bubbles will add up, but since I haven't taken any other damage throughout the course of this game, I still feel like I'm in a really good spot. Once Gigaton lands, Malamar can win the game. Gigaton will land. The game looks very weird there for a second, and it took me until now to realize what happened. They pivoted in Primeape to try and read the combo play, but the Primeape never showed up on my screen. The only way I was able to see this after the fact was purely just looking back and seeing the Pokeballs at the top right go from 2 to 1. So visually, that looked incredibly weird, but apparently they ended up trying to read the combo play, which I guess makes sense because Superpower would have knocked out the Azu, but either way, just a lot of visual weirdness on this new system, and it's stuff that I really hope they get sorted out, because I think the bare bones in terms of the mechanics that this new system is built on is really good, but obviously there's a lot of work to be done in terms of trying to fix all of the errors that have come with this new system. In the meantime, as we get back to the gameplay, it's more business as usual as Shadow Malamar is able to win Switch against the Mimikyu. They send in Carbink, I bank energy, pivot into the Jellicent, and their final Pokemon is revealed to be Toucanon. I fire off the Surf, they no-shield the Surf, and this game is over. Now I can just win the game with Tinkaton. My opponent ends up overfarming a ton. They actually let me make it to a Surf, which is able to force the final shield. So I guess they're just farming to 100 and then taking the knockout with a Drill Peck. At this point of the game, I have a guaranteed win condition. Send in the Tinkaton, absorb the Beak Blast, and then when they pivot back into the Carbink, bank Gigaton, reset the debuff by switching in Malamar and sniping with Superpower, and then take the one-hit KO with Gigaton Hammer. So, I get debuffed, they bring back in the Carbink, and they will resign the match. We move to the next game, and our Core Breaker has returned as Shadow Malamar leads into Jumpluff. We were able to beat the last Jumpluff lead, but it was definitely not easy. I'm just going to overfarm massively here, waiting for them to throw, but they don't ever end up firing off energy. Foul Play lands, doing very nice damage. My opponent is going to undertap, and I'm going to be no-shielding, calling the Energy Ball. But that's not an Energy Ball. Acrobatics lands. I'm able to survive on 1 HP, but unfortunately, this Foul Play will barely fail to take the knockout. Had I thrown one more Psywave, I believe that may have taken the knockout there, so a bit of an error by me. They send in Ninetales, I pivot in Jellicent, but somehow the game is not lost because it's Blastoise in the back. This realistically should have been the game where the win streak came to an end. If they had just about anything in the back that wasn't a Blastoise, I'd probably lose, but it turns out their backline is insanely weak to Jellicent, so Jellicent will actually be able to take home the win. One could argue that I should just tank a Hydro, shield a Hydro, and farm down, but I felt like by firing off the Surf and preserving both Protect Shields that I had a pretty clear path to victory. So I fire off the Surf, take the knockout, as Kanto Ninetales switches back in, I can fire off Surf. I'm never going to be Emperor down here, and I have a full health Tinkaton, so I'm just going to pivot into the Tinkaton and start firing off Bulldozes. Even as they fire off a super effective Weather Ball, it's never going to take the knockout. I'm just simply too healthy. Tinkaton has insanely good stats. So they Weather Ball, I can very comfortably survive, and I'm able to make the next Bulldoze. My opponent goes for the CMP tie, but this is where my final Protect Shield is used. Sorry, not my final Protect Shield. My first Protect Shield will be used, because this will allow me to either guarantee the final shield or get a ton of damage, and if I get the damage, I can just pivot into the Jellicent, get the Hex down, and take the win. We honestly got very lucky that was their final Pokemon, or otherwise we probably would have lost. Speaking of losing, all win streaks have to come to an end, so after 20 wins in a row, how did we end up losing? Well, as you probably guessed, it starts with leading Shadow Malamar into Bug-Bite Fortress. I save switch into Jellicent, I'm answered with a Fearow, and this game is off to a truly terrible start. Fearow lands the Drill Peck, I'm forced to undertap, otherwise I would get outpaced, but this is going to set up my opponent to go for a one-shield farm down. In hindsight, I think I had to save switch into the Tinkaton. Tinkaton may have been the better and safer switch into this team, because as it turns out, my opponent didn't really have a strong answer to Tinkaton. They have Fearow, but obviously Fearow doesn't really want to switch in down energy. They pivot back into the Fortress. Honestly, a terrific play from them. I full send Superpower just to get some damage onto this Pokemon, and then pivot into the Tinkaton. I can't stay in the matchup. I'm taking double super effective damage, and I'm debuffed, but I also don't want to take Sand Tombs on my only remaining healthy Pokemon. I can overfarm, go for the Bulldoze, but if my opponent plays it well, they're always going to shield here, and they do. My opponent has a big team comp advantage, but they're honestly leveraging it perfectly. I don't really want to shield the Sand Tomb, but unfortunately, I'm just running out of HP. The reason I can't shield the Sand Tomb is my opponent has a Drill Run loaded on that Fearow. So I'm able to finally take the knockout. As they bring in Fearow, I can pivot into the Malamar, and in the back, it's Shadow Kingdra. Had I save switched into the Tinkaton, could have been a different game as they were kind of soft to Tinkaton. They may have had to stay in, and then we could have had a chance to win. But unfortunately, we did not, and we fall just short of legend. 20 wins in a row, we do take a loss, and we end at 2980 ELO. All in all, it's not every day you're able to win 20 games in a row at competitive ELO, so I felt like this run was very worthy of being memorialized in a video. As far as the team itself, I do recognize that by making a video on this team, it's probably going to put a pretty big target on this team's back. Whereas this team was very strong when not a lot of people were aware of it, but I realized that by making the video, people will probably team build with trying to core break this particular team in mind. Like, this team would not appreciate a Morpeko lead, for example. It's not a big fan of Bug-Bite Fortress leads. It's not a big fan of, like, if there's a Mandibuzz or something like that. I do think that in a very weird way, that Shadow Mightyena is actually very playable for this team, because as the Shadow Malamar, you can always force 2 shields, and then even though they have a decently healthy Mightyena, you can send in a Tinkaton up a shield to try and farm them down, they're forced to pivot out, and then you kind of have Jellicent up a shield, which is usually very strong into a lot of the backlines that Mightyena lead teams have. So in a weird way, I do think that this team is actually surprisingly decent into Shadow Mightyena teams, even though on paper it should be very, very weak to them. I think with energy management on Jellicent in the mid to late game, you can oftentimes be kind of a wrecking ball into an opponent's backline. So all in all, I ended up having a ton of fun with this team. I'm a little sad that we fell just short of Legend, but starting low 27s and ending 2980 is a pretty insane run. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated. Thank you guys oh so very much, and until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.